The July sun beat down on the training camp at Fort Jackson, South Carolina, as 63 recruits lined up in perfect formation. Among them was 26-year-old Eliza Donovan, who stood out not for her stature. She was of average height and athletic build, but for the determination etched in her gaze. Her gray-green eyes, shaded by expressive eyebrows, rarely strayed from the horizon. But at that moment, as sweat trickled down her temples, Eliza felt the gazes of the other recruits piercing her back. Basic training in the United States Army was no place for the faint of heart. Eliza knew this when she enlisted 3 months after her 26th birthday, leaving behind a promising career in finance in Chicago. Her parents didn't understand the decision. Her mother cried. Her father remained deafeningly silent. Her friends thought she was having an early midlife crisis. No one understood that, for Eliza, this decision wasn't an impulse. It was the culmination of a promise made long ago. "Donovan, stop daydreaming and give me 20 push-ups." Sergeant Miller's voice echoed across the field, jolting Eliza from her thoughts. Without hesitation, she positioned herself and began performing the push-ups with mechanical precision. "Look at the little princess of Wall Street," whispered Jackson, a recruit from Nebraska, with whom Eliza shared a dorm room. "I bet she won't last the first week." The suppressed laughter of the other recruits hit Eliza like stones, but she kept up the pace, counting each push-up aloud, her face impassive. It was the 3rd day of basic training, and she had already become a favorite target for jokes. The Wall Street princess, as they called her, was seen as an outsider, someone who didn't belong in that world of military discipline and physical endurance. Few knew that behind that refined executive appearance was a woman with unwavering purpose. 20, Sergeant. Eliza stood up, returning to her position of attention, her uniform already soaked with sweat. Milla stared at her with steely eyes. Tall, broad-shouldered, and with a shaved head, he was the personification of military discipline. "Is that all you've got, Donovan? I thought you were here to become a soldier, not for a spa session." "Yes, sir," Eliza replied, keeping her gaze fixed ahead, while some giggles echoed in the row behind her. The following weeks were a constant test of physical and mental endurance. While other recruits received mail at home, Eliza rarely checked her mail. No one was waiting for her, except perhaps her former boss, still stunned by her sudden resignation. The only calls she made in her rare free moments were to her lawyer, making sure her affairs were in order. During morning workouts, Eliza was often the last to finish her runs, but she never gave up. Her body, accustomed to long hours in air-conditioned offices, protested against the new routine, but her mind remained focused. At night, while other recruits shared stories about family and boyfriends, Eliza kept to herself, reviewing manuals or polishing her equipment until curfew sounded. "Hey, Donovan," called Martinez, a young woman from Los Angeles with whom Eliza occasionally exchanged words. "Why are you here? I mean, you had a comfortable life, right?" Eliza looked up from her first aid manual. "I have my reasons," she replied simply, returning her attention to the book. She was never rude, just reserved, as if she carried a burden she couldn't share. It was during the 3rd week, during a particularly brutal combat training exercise, that things began to change. The recruits were crawling under barbed wire while simulated explosions shook the ground around them. Mud, rain, and the constant roar of orders created a hellish scenario designed to test each other's limits. "Donovan is falling apart," someone shouted when Eliza stopped momentarily, stuck on a particularly difficult stretch of the course. "I knew she wouldn't be able to handle it," another voice replied. It was at that moment that something inside Eliza ignited. With a sudden movement, she broke free, advancing with an intensity that surprised even Sergeant Miller, who was watching closely. She finished the course in record time, her uniform completely muddied, but with a glint of determination in her eyes that hadn't been there before. "Impressive," Donovan Miller commented, making notes on his clipboard. "Perhaps there's something to you after all." That small victory didn't completely silence the skeptics, but it gave Eliza a moment of respite. In the days that followed, she began to win the reluctant admiration of some of her teammates, especially after demonstrating surprising skills at the shooting range and in tactical training. It was during the 5th week, however, that the incident occurred. The recruits had just finished a grueling physical training session and were preparing to shower. In the women's dormitory, Eliza was changing into her uniform when Jackson and 2 other recruits entered. "Hey, Wall Street, I heard you hit all the targets today," Jackson taunted. "You must have bought the answers, right?" Eliza ignored the comment, continuing to sort out her clean uniform. That's when Jackson noticed something on her back, partially visible above the tank top she was wearing. "What's that? Does the little princess have a tattoo?" Jackson approached, looking more closely. "Hey guys, come see this." Before Eliza could react, there were 5 recruits surrounding her, all trying to see the mark on her back. Martinez, who was nearby, frowned. "Leave her alone, guys. This is none of your business." "Oh, come on. Ms. Perfection has a wild side. That's news," Jackson insisted, stretching his arm to pull Eliza's shirt down, revealing more of the tattoo. The move was a mistake. In an instant, Eliza spun, gripping Jackson's wrist with a steely hold, her eyes now icy. "Don't touch me," she said, in a low voice that froze the air around her. Something about the intensity of his gaze made Jackson recoil. "Relax. We were just curious." The tension was broken by the abrupt entrance of Sergeant Miller, accompanied by the unit commander, Colonel Richard Hayes. The recruits quickly lined up, returning to their positions of attention. "What's going on here?" Miller thundered, his eyes scanning the group. "Nothing, Sergeant. Just a friendly chat," Jackson replied, avoiding Eliza's gaze. Miller didn't seem convinced, but before he could insist, Colonel Hayes, a middle-aged man with a bearing that commanded respect, stepped forward. "Recruit Donovan, I need to speak in private." The silence that followed was heavy. Eliza nodded briefly, following the colonel out of the dormitory while the other recruits exchanged confused glances. In Colonel Hayes's office, Eliza stood at attention while the officer studied her with an unreadable expression. "Make yourself comfortable, recruit," he said finally, indicating a chair. "Take a seat." Eliza obeyed, retaining an upright posture and a fixed gaze. The colonel sat behind his desk, leafing through a folder that appeared to contain his personal files. "You've excelled in training, Donovan," he began. "Despite a difficult start, your evaluations have been consistently excellent. Sergeant Miller speaks highly of your tactical skills." "Thank you, sir," Eliza replied, without changing her expression. The colonel closed the briefcase, leaning back in his chair. "However, I'm curious, a Princeton graduate with an MBA from Chicago, a promising career at one of the country's largest investment banks. Why the Army? And why now?" Eliza hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "I have my reasons, sir. Personal one." The colonel nodded, as if expecting that response. "I understand. However, something tells me there's more to this story." He leaned forward. "Recruit, I saw something today that left me intrigued. That tattoo on your back." Eliza felt her heart race, but she maintained her composure. "Sir, don't pretend you don't know what I'm talking about, Donovan," he said, his voice now lower. "That symbol isn't common. In fact, it's extremely rare. And the fact that you have it, double quotes." He paused, as if choosing his next words carefully. "Tell me, how did you come to know about Operation Shadow?" The name made Eliza shudder internally, but years of self-control prevented her from showing any visible reaction. "I'm not authorized to discuss this, sir." A tense silence filled the office. Colonel Hayes studied her for a long moment before finally speaking. "Your father was Daniel Donovan, wasn't he?" The mention of that name momentarily shattered Eliza's facade. "Yes, sir." The colonel opened a drawer in his desk, taking out an old photograph. He slid it across the desk to Eliza. In the picture, a group of young soldiers posed somewhere arid and mountainous, probably in Afghanistan. Among them was a man Eliza recognized immediately, her father, more than 20 years younger, with the same determined look she had inherited. "We served together," said Colonel Hayes, his voice now heavy with solemn respect. "He was one of the finest men I've ever known. When I received the news of his death, I felt as if I had lost a brother." Eliza looked at the photo, a wave of memories threatening to engulf her. "He never talked about his service," she said, almost to herself. "But I always knew it was important." More than you can imagine, Hayes replied. Operation Shadow was one of the most secret missions ever conducted by our special forces. What your father did saved countless lives. He paused. How did you find out about it? And how did you get that tattoo? Eliza took a deep breath. It was a story she had never shared with anyone, not even her mother. When my father died, I received a box with his personal belongings. Among them was a coded diary and a key to a safe deposit box in a New York bank. She paused. Inside the safe deposit box, I found documents, photos, and a letter addressed to me to be opened when I turned 25. The colonel nodded, encouraging her to continue. In the letter, my father explained everything: the mission, the oath he and his comrades took, the symbol that represented their unity. He wrote that if I ever wanted to honor his legacy, I would know how. Eliza looked directly at the colonel. The tattoo is exactly the same as his, done by the same artist in New Orleans, who swore to keep it a secret. And now you're here, Hayes concluded. Now I'm here, Eliza confirmed. Not to follow in his footsteps exactly, but to understand what he stood for, what motivated him to make a difference, as he did. Colonel Hayes stood up and walked to the window of his office, from where he could see the training field. Your father was part of a special unit, Donovan. A unit that officially never existed. They carried out missions that no one else could carry, out in places where no one else dared to go. Turning to face her, he continued, that tattoo you have, the falcon emerging from the shadows, was the symbol of that unity. Only 12 men and women have ever had it, and all have sworn never to reveal its existence. His gaze intensified. When I saw it on your back today, I almost couldn't believe it. It's like seeing a ghost. I didn't know I would be recognized, Eliza admitted. My father's letter mentioned that few people knew the symbol. It was a personal act, a way to keep it with me. The colonel returned to his desk and sat down again. You understand what this means, don't you? Now that I've seen it, others can see it too. People who are still hunting down members of that unit today. A chill ran down Eliza's spine. My father mentioned enemies, but I thought that after all this time, ... some hatreds never die. Recruit, Hayes said gravely. Especially in our line of work. Your father's final mission, the one that cost him. His life exposed an arms trafficking network that stretched from Afghanistan to Washington. Some of the people he helped take down had powerful connections that still exist. Eliza processed the information, feeling the weight of the revelation. The car accident that killed my father... It probably wasn't an accident, Hayes confirmed, his voice low. We couldn't prove it at the time, but we always suspected it. The silence that followed was dense, laden with implications. Eliza looked at her hands, noticing that they were perfectly steady, despite the emotional storm unfolding within her. Years of suspicions finally confirmed, pieces of a puzzle painfully fitting together. What happens now? She finally asked. Colonel Hayes crossed his arms on the table. That's up to you, Donovan. Now that I know who you are, and more importantly, that you carry that symbol, I have a responsibility to protect you, just as I promised your father I would if our paths ever crossed again. Protection is not what I came here seeking, sir, Eliza replied, a tone of determination returning to her voice. No, I don't imagine so. Hayes smiled slightly, the first sign of emotion he had shown during the entire conversation. Daniel would be proud. You have the same fire in your eyes that he had. He picked up the photo again, looking at it nostalgically before putting it away. I'll be direct, Donovan. Your basic training ends in 3 weeks. Normally, you would be assigned to your specialty and follow the normal path of any soldier. But given the circumstances, I'm offering an alternative. Eliza straightened up in her chair, attentive. There is a unit, not the same as your father's, but similar in purpose that could benefit from someone with your skills. Intelligence, financial analysis, the ability to blend into environments that most soldiers couldn't. He paused meaningfully. And, of course, the personal motivation that clearly brought you here. What kind of unit would that be, sir? Officially, she doesn't have a name, Hayes replied. She works at the intersection of military intelligence and federal law enforcement, focusing on threats that cross borders, both geographic and jurisdictional. He observed her closely. It wouldn't be an easy path. It would require additional training, isolation, personal sacrifices, but it could be a chance to continue the work her father started. Eliza didn't hesitate. "I'm interested, sir." The colonel nodded, as if he had expected that answer. "I thought you would. However, there's something you need to understand before making a final decision." His tone darkened. "By accepting, you'll be putting a target on your back, literally. If the wrong people see that tattoo, the consequences could be serious. With all due respect, Colonel, that target has been there since the day I decided to honor my father," Eliza replied firmly. "The difference is that now I know it." Hayes studied her for a moment before nodding again. "Very well. Starting tomorrow, your basic training will continue as normal, at least in appearance. In reality, you will be observed and evaluated more rigorously. If you successfully complete the training, you will be discreetly transferred to a facility in Virginia for the next phase." He stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. "For now, that's all I can say. Discretion is essential, Donovan. No one can know about this conversation or the real meaning of that tattoo." Eliza stood up, resuming her position of attention. "Understood, sir. And what about the other recruit? The teasing about the tattoo ... double quotes to me," Hayes said with a slight smile. "Starting tomorrow, I believe Sergeant Miller will find other aspects of training to keep his colleagues too busy to gossip." When Eliza returned to the dormitory, she found the place strangely silent. The recruits who normally teased her now avoided her gaze, and an air of uncertainty hung in the air. Martinez approached as Eliza tidied her bunk. "Everything all right?" Martinez asked in a low voice. "That meeting with the colonel ... all right," Eliza replied, keeping her voice neutral. "Just administrative matter." Martinez seemed to want to say more but hesitated. "Listen, about today ... Jackson was an idiot. Some of us spoke to her afterward." Eliza looked at her colleague, surprised by the gesture. "Thank you. It wasn't necessary, but I appreciate it. We're a unit, right? We have to support each other." Martinez shrugged, trying to sound casual. "Besides, you've been doing well lately." "Very well, actually. That earns respect." That night, while the other recruits slept, Eliza stayed awake, staring at the dormitory ceiling. The conversation with Colonel Hayes had changed everything. What had begun as a personal journey of discovery was now transforming into something much bigger and potentially more dangerous. She thought of her father, of the sacrifice he had made, of the truths had never been able to share in life. She thought of the tattoo on his back, not just a symbol of honor, but now a constant reminder of the path she had chosen to follow, a path in the shadows, like the one her father had walked. The following morning, as promised by Colonel Hayes, the routine at the training camp changed drastically. Sergeant Miller subjected the recruits to a series of exercises so exhausting that no one had the breath to talk, much less tease their colleagues. The few times Jackson glanced in Eliza's direction, it was with a mixture of reluctant respect and confusion. During the weeks that followed, Eliza noticed subtle changes in her training, shooting exercises that seemed slightly more advanced than those offered to the other recruits, endurance tests that lasted longer, situational intelligence assessments that weren't part of the standard curriculum, and always, watching from afar, Colonel Hayes, his expression neutral, but his eyes attentive, Eliza embraced each challenge with renewed determination. She was no longer just a recruit trying to prove her worth or find answers about her past. Now, she was a soldier in training for a greater mission, a mission that somehow was already inscribed in her DNA. In the penultimate week of basic training, during a nighttime navigation exercise, Eliza found herself alone in an isolated spot in the forest surrounding the camp. Or at least, she thought she was alone, until she heard a branch snapping behind her. Turning quickly, she found herself face to face with a man she didn't recognize, not an instructor, not a recruit. Tall, with features marked by subtle scars, he watched her with a disconcerting intensity. "Elizabeth Donovan," he said, not as a question, but as a confirmation. "Daughter of Daniel." Instinctively, Eliza adopted a defensive posture. "Who are you?" "A friend," he replied simply, "one of the few left from the old days." He looked around, making sure they were truly alone. Hayes told me you were here. He also mentioned the tattoo. The mention of the tattoo made Eliza even more tense. "If you knew my father, you know I shouldn't trust him easily." The man smiled, a gesture that momentarily softened his harsh features. "He taught you well. Slowly, he turned, partially lifting his shirt to reveal a mark identical to Elisa's, the same falcon emerging from the shadows. My name is Michael Turner. Your father saved my life twice. I could only repay him once. Eliza relaxed slightly, studying the man more closely. You were there on the last mission. Turner nodded, his eyes now dark. I've spent the last 15 years trying to finish what we started. What? I thought the network had been dismantled. The head was cut off, but new tentacles grew, Turner explained. Powerful people have ways of protecting themselves, of reinventing themselves. The man who orchestrated your father's accident never faced justice. He went into hiding, changed his identity, and built a new empire. Eliza felt the blood run cold in her veins. Did you find him? I found him. And I lost him, Turner admitted, a hint of frustration in his voice. He has resources, connections, he's always one step ahead. But now, ... He looked directly at her. Now, things can change. Because of me? Eliza asked, uncertain. Because of who you are? Because of what you can do, Turner replied. Hayes told me about your background. Princeton, MBA, Wall Street. You understand? The world of finance, of numbers. He paused. That's where he operates now? No longer physical weapons, but money, funding for operations that threaten not only individual lives, but the stability of entire regions. Eliza absorbed the information, mentally connecting the dots. Is that why Hayes mentioned a special unit? To track this man? Turner shook his head. Not just him, the whole network. But yes, he's a priority. He checked his watch. I have to go. You need to be back before your absence is noticed. But I needed to see you, confirm it for myself. His eyes soft. You look like him. Same determination. Before Eliza could answer, Turner was already walking away among the... We will meet again soon, Elizabeth Donovan, he said, his voice almost a whisper in the darkness. Be ready. The encounter left Eliza shaken, but also with a renewed sense of purpose. In the following night, while her fellow recruits slept, she mentally reviewed everything she knew about her father, about Operation Shadow, about the mystery she had been gradually unraveling since opening that letter on her 25th birthday. On the last day of basic training, as the recruits prepared for the graduation ceremony, Sergeant Miller called Eliza aside. Donovan, he said, his voice softer than usual. I've been watching your progress from the beginning. You've surprised me. Thank you, Sergeant, she replied, genuinely touched by the rare compliment. Miller looked around, making sure no one else could hear them. Colonel Hayes spoke to me. I know you're being transferred to specialized training after the ceremony. He studied her for a moment. I don't know exactly what you'll be doing, and that's probably for the best. But I want you to know that you have what it takes. That means a lot, Sergeant, especially coming from you. Miller nodded briefly. Your father would be proud, Donovan. I didn't know him personally, but his reputation. Well, let's just say you live up to the name you carry. The mention of her father by someone who had never even met him personally reinforced for Eliza the importance of the legacy she was undertaking. After the graduation ceremony, while other recruits celebrated with family or excitedly discussed their next assignments, Eliza found herself alone, observing the training camp that had been her home for the past few months. Ready for the next step? Colonel Hayes' voice startled her. He had approached silently, now standing beside her, also looking out at the field. Yes, sir, she replied without hesitation. Hayes nodded, satisfied. A ride will be waiting for you in an hour. Bring only your essential personal items. Everything else will be provided at your destination. And what about Destiny, sir? A facility on the outskirts of Langley, he replied. Officially, you're being transferred for administrative training. Unofficially, ... quotes, he left the sentence hanging. Let's just say your real education is only beginning. As Eliza gathered her belongings from the dorm, Martinez approached to say goodbye. In recent weeks, a hesitant friendship had formed between them, nothing deep, but based on mutual respect. So, you're going to Langley, said Martinez. You must have impressed someone important. Eliza smiled, neither confirming nor denying. And you? Where will your next post be? Fort Benning for advanced infantry training, Martinez replied proudly. Who knows, maybe we'll meet again. Someday on some mission? Who knows? Eliza agreed. knowing it was unlikely. The paths they had chosen would rarely cross. As the sun began to set, Eliza boarded an unmarked black sedan that was waiting for her at the edge of the field. To her surprise, beside her was Michael Turner. "Hello again, Shadow Jr.," he greeted, using a nickname that made Eliza raise her eyebrows. "Was that what they called my father?" she asked as the car began to move. Among other things, Turner replied with a slight smile. Most things that are unrepeatable in good company. During the long drive to Virginia, Turner explained more about the program. Eliza was being recruited for a joint task force, operating in the shadows of the military and intelligence bureaucracy, tracking threats that existed in the spaces between traditional jurisdictions. "His background in finance will be crucial," he explained. "Following the money is often the only way to find these ghosts, especially our main target does." "This ghost have a name?" Eliza asked. Turner hesitated, as if weighing the implications of sharing that information. Alexander Voss, born Anton Voloshin in Ukraine, naturalized American in the 1980s. He built a legitimate tech empire before becoming involved in arms trafficking and eventually financing extremist groups. He paused. His father discovered Voss's connections to corrupt officials in Washington. That was the information he was bringing when ... double quotes. He didn't finish the sentence. Eliza absorbed the information in silence, finally putting a name to the man responsible for her father's death. "And you think he's still active?" "More than ever," Turner confirmed. "Only now it operates through a complex network of shell companies and financial institutions. That's why we need someone who understands this world. Someone like you." The car continued into the night, taking Eliza to a future she could never have imagined just a few months earlier. As she watched the lights of the road passing by the window, she thought about the journey that had brought her there, beginning with a letter, a revelation, a tattoo. The tattoo on her back, once merely a personal tribute, now carried a much greater weight. It was a symbol of belonging to something larger than herself, a silent oath to continue a fight that had begun long before she was born. A mark that, as she had discovered in training camp, had the power to provoke scorn from the ignorant and awaken fear in those who knew it. True meaning. 3 months later, in an anonymous meeting room in an unmarked building on the outskirts of Langley, Eliza stood before a complex digital map that revealed financial connections between dozens of seemingly unrelated entities. Beside her, Turner and Hayes watched as she explained her discovery. All these seemingly legitimate transactions converge on this holding company in Singapore, she explained, pointing to a central node on the map. And from there, after several conversions and transfers, the money ends up here. Her finger moved to a red dot on the screen. A private account in Zurich that, through various intermediaries, finances operations in at least 3 conflict zones. Hayes nodded, impressed. "Can you trace it all the way to Voss?" "Not directly," Eliza admitted. "He's meticulous, but I found a pattern in the transactions that matches exactly what my father documented 15 years ago." She opened another file, showing pages from the coded diary she had. Inherited, same structure, just different players. "It's him." Turner exchanged a meaningful look with Hayes. "That's more than we've had in years." "Good job, Donovan. It's not enough for a formal indictment, obviously," Hayes noted, "but it's a start. A clear direction." "And what's the next step?" Eliza asked. Hayes approached the map, studying it carefully. "We need someone on the inside, someone who can access information that doesn't appear in these financial records. Someone from Wall Street," Turner concluded, looking directly at Eliza. "Someone who already has connections in that world. Someone whose presence wouldn't raise suspicion." Eliza understood the implication immediately. "An undercover mission. Your former company has ties to that bank in Singapore," Hayes explained, indicating a document on his desk. "With your experience and credentials, it wouldn't be difficult to arrange a transfer. Officially, you would have left the Army after basic training, returning to your former career." "A perfectly plausible story," Turner added. "After all, many recruits realize that military life isn't for them." Eliza considered the proposal, weighing the risk. "What if Voss finds out who I am? What if he connects my last name to mine, ... It's a risk," Hayes admitted. But Donovan isn't an uncommon name, and her public records have been carefully sanitized. For all intents and purposes, you're just a former investment banker who briefly tried a military career before returning to your roots. Furthermore, Turner added, we would have support on site. You wouldn't be alone. Eliza looked again at the map, at the nodes and connections that represented a criminal empire built on blood and betrayal. Somewhere in that network was the man responsible for her father's death. The chance to dismantle his organization, to finally bring justice, was irresistible. When do we start? She asked. 2 weeks later, Eliza Donovan, now officially a civilian again, walked through the gleaming corridors of the Singapore Financial Center, her suit impeccably tailored and her security badge dangling discreetly around her neck. To everyone around her, it was just another American executive transferred to her bank's Asian branch, ambitious, competent, and completely normal. No one there could have imagined that, beneath the thin fabric of her blouse, was tattooed the symbol of a unit that officially never existed. A symbol that months before had provoked mockery in a military training until a commander saw it and paled. Recognizing the legacy that young woman carried and the danger that awaited her, Eliza adjusted her blazer, completely covering the tattoo, and moved forward, ready for the next chapter of a mission that had begun long before her, but which was now hers to complete. A mission in the shadows, just as her father would have wanted.